Hey, you're listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
Hi, I'm nuggs-the-final-girl, and we are joined um, by Kelly-Reynolds, a writer, voice actor, podcaster, just to name a few, and with a book coming out. Oh my goodness, I totally forgot to write it down. Meet me in Las Feliz. I'm so sorry I butchered that. But could you tell us more about your book and your podcast that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the podcast host of Boobies and Newbies, which has had some wonderful crossovers with victims and villains over the years. It's been amazing. We've talked about everything from Mean Girls to Showgirls to, back again now to talk about horror. But I talk about romance novels. And so I love them so much that I decided to write one. And that is meet-me-in-los-feliz, or however you want to pronounce it, because I know that when I wrote a title like that, it was going to get butchered, and that's okay. Um, so it's a holiday novella, but because it takes place in LA, there is basically nothing holiday-ish about it that you would expect. There's no snow, there's no cabin and skiing and snowboarding because I'm a West Coast born and bred girl. So I wanted to write a holiday book that looked like my holidays. And that's basically where that came from. And I've got the second book in the series coming out this fall.
Now, I actually own a copy of this book. This book has been out for probably 6 months at this point, maybe seven. It came out last October.
October.
I have read about half of it. I've not finished it yet, but I love how one of the things that it has come to be known about some of our collaborations is that I was a newbie when it came to romance, and just kind of thought it was like, oh, this is like the written equivalent of what porn would be,
Mm-hmm.
and was quickly disproven within the first episode. And I think this book right here definitely is able to also kind of continue to deconstruct that. And I love the fact that you kind of have a shy, timid guy as the love interest, but you also have a plus size queen as your protagonist.
Hell yeah.
Uh, could you kind of talk about some of the creative processes of what you wanted to do when this book kind of originated within your mind?
Yeah, I think, and I've learned this from all of the interviews that I've done with authors over the years on my podcast, is that I think a lot of authors write what they wish they got to read. They write the stories to incorporate characters and situations and, professions, whatever it might be, that reflect their everyday experiences that maybe they don't get to see represented. And I myself am also a plus size queen. And so when I don't get to see enough versions of myself falling in love, I wanted to write one. And that's definitely the kind of romance that I love to read. I love to read about characters who look and sound like me. I love to read about, you know, uh, childless people in their 30s living their best lives. I love to read about people across the queer spectrum. So I definitely want to write books that reflect the world that I exist in every shape and size and color. And that was kind of how Mimi and Los Feliz began. Was it's something that, especially when you write your first book, you kind of want to cram in as many things as possible, because you never know if you're going to write a second one. You don't know what's coming after that. You don't know how it's going to be received by readers. So I really wanted to put in my ideal man and my ideal woman, and just like put them everything that I would want to exist in this one chance that I might have at writing a romance novel, to get it in there. And I love the holidays, so why not put that in? Why not put in some fun toy play? I literally just, like, I tell everybody this is a very low angst, low I mean really just low in a lot of things that I think you would expect from a novel in that it's a lot of just fun and hijinks. It's mostly holidays and hookups. And I think that's kind of a brand that I am absolutely okay leaning into.
Well, and that's like really cool because a lot of the time I feel like maybe not so much recently because there definitely has been a shift with media and
Yeah.
everything else, but it's so nice to see normal everyday things being put out as like, yeah, these are like really cool events. You do not have to go to like an extravagant like party uptown, like, and be all dressed up and stuff. Like, you can have really cute meet cutes and it still be really impactful. So that's really cool that you did that.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I definitely wanted to write characters who are, not living the glamorous Los Angeles lifestyle because I lived in LA for 5 years and I worked in like the TV film industry, and it is anything but glamorous unless, you're Julia Roberts. But
Right.
so I definitely wanted to have just sort of like everyday people that exist here and like what they do and they take the bus and they go to ugly sweater parties at shady bars in Santa Monica. Like they're not necessarily going to red carpet events. So, and don't get me wrong, I love to read those books too. I
Oh,
love to read some celebrity and glamour and fantasy, but when it comes to writing, I like to write what I think of as more like realistic romance in terms of it being something that this could happen to you, this could happen to me, this could happen to any one of our friends on any given day.
Well, yeah, because like I feel like that's one of the things that like I've started to open up a little bit more to fantasy. If fantasy is not my like normal genre that I go to. And typically the story is that if I am going on my own to romance, it's going to be something that is going to be like Nora and Bowie's story here, to where
Mm,
you're going to have like normal people that you want to engage with. It's part of the reason that I love horror so much, is because horror is a connection point for me in the story.
mm.
This film that we're getting ready to talk about is probably one of the most personal films I've seen in recent memory. It's probably one of the ones that has brought out so much emotion in me. And so when you feel like the stories, especially in romance, that click to me more are this is a genre specifically for me personally where I want to relate to normal people. I want to relate to be like, oh man, like that sucks. Like I've gone through that, or who hasn't ever felt the weight of, relationship pressure, or had that chance encounter. It's how me and my wife met.
aw.
So yeah, I really kind of tend to gravitate more towards that. We'll bring you back before October, before the sequel. But I want to ask this last question for Venice, actually, which is the follow-up to this one. Um heck, there's a short story in there, but
There
um
is.
for Venice, actually, are is this a continuation of Norris and Bowie's story, or is this kind of like just kind of like an anthology that you're kind of doing with this series?
It is not a continuation of their story. You will, by the time you finish meet-me-in-los-feliz, have a very clear indication of who who is going to be the focus of Venice, actually. The best way I explain romance series to people is it's basically like the Marvel Cinematic Universe where they can all exist as Avengers, but everybody gets their own movie. And in romance, that's kind of how it works. Is I'm writing a series set in LA during the holidays, and there are three different couples over the course of three different books. They definitely have some overlap. They know each other, they work with each other, they're friends with each other, but they each get their own book. So Venice actually is going to be about I have a thing for Brits. I can't help myself. It's the accent. So it's going to be about a retired British soccer player turned soccer coach and this roommates to lovers situation that he has with somebody that you actually have already met probably in your read of Meet-Me-in-Los-Feliz, which is Bowie's employee at the tea shop. So yeah, I'm excited. It's again, it's kind of a blend of all the things that I love to read. I'm very selfish that way when it comes to my writing. Like I'm only writing things. I'm sure this is not the way to market and, get readers, is like they tell you, oh, what do the readers want? No, I write what I want. I write what I want to read in the hopes that there will be somebody else who also wants to read that. So that's the goal. We'll see how it works out.
Well,
I
like,
mean,
what
go
a
ahead.
cool idea to, it's like I guess just from you describing all the books and the stories that they all are technically tied together, but like you said, the Marvel universe, it's like a slight anthology or like a slight collection. And it's really cool that you get to grow with the characters, even if they are like random, quote unquote, random background characters, like a tea shop attendant. Like,
Yeah.
that's really neat.
One of the things that I was gonna say in regards to, I just lost it.
Oh, no.
Just lost it
That
attached to my
happens
phone.
to me all the time.
It's fine.
It
Do you want me
happens.
to introduce the movie that we're going to be talking about then?
Absolutely.
All right. So, with this movie, if you are going to watch it, there is a trigger warning. There is a very graphic unaliving in the beginning. So, if that is not something that you are okay with, maybe read the Sparks notes or the IMDb page of it so that you don't get triggered. But we are talking about the movie Clock, and that is directed by Alexis-Jacknow. I think I'm saying that right. So what did you guys think of this movie?
Horrifying. Like it's no, it's really I think it's interesting the way that we were when we started and we were talking about my book, and Josh, you said that you like romance that feels more realistic. There's a massive crossover for me when it comes to like reading romance and reading thriller or watching
Mhm.
horror, in that I, just as much as I love romance that feels more realistic and with characters in a contemporary setting, with my horror and thriller that I consume, because these are my two genres that I love. um I find it more horrifying and terrifying when it's something that could very well be real, when it's
Mhm.
not necessarily a ghost or any kind of like monster paranormal entity. It's the reality, the real horror that creeps me out. And so that is why when I look at a movie like this, that I share far too many similarities with the main character of, I am just like, oh my God, this is terrifying. This could be me.
Yeah, it literally, they did a really good job of making it as realistic as possible. And I think that's what they were trying to do with incorporating the like Jewish lineage and the Holocaust into it, so that there was a event, like a grounded event that we could be like, oh, we know that that happened in our life, so this isn't totally out of the realm of possibility, which I thought was pretty smart of the writer director.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jack now is both the writer and director. And
Yeah.
this is a debut from her. And I've seen this movie twice now. I reviewed it I got early access to it, and uh I immediately, once I finished this, I went and watched everything I could find of her. She's made a couple short films, and I fell in love with this movie. I've
Mm-hmm.
never had a movie validate my feelings on parenthood in such a profound way. But this movie also has one of the best villains I've seen in a long time, played by Melora Hardin. I think she does a great job. Every time I
Mm-hmm.
watch this, I constantly want to punch her in the face and break my television. Um, and Hearted, like if you watch The Office, like you know her from Jan,
Jan.
she's she's such a good like she just gets under your skin because she has so much charisma. You could tell that it's one of that backstabbing charisma that you just can't trust. And there's so much about this movie that I feel like made is just made better by a platform like a podcast. It's not just a movie that you can just kind of talk about and digest easily. There's a lot of layers to this. And Emily, you brought up the whole concept of how like Jewish lineage is kind of
Mhm.
brought into this. I would say that I think they used lineage, Jewish lineage, because it's really easy to kind of talk about and tie that into it. But it's this concept of overarching legacy, not just for Jewish lineage, but just every kind of legacy period. What am I going to leave in the wake of my memories or what have I done in this life that's actually going to count for something?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's definitely I think there's some really interesting conversations about like intersectionality with this movie too, because not only is this our main character, a woman who is facing the pressures that women do on a day-to-day basis to have children, but she's also a Jewish woman, and I think that factors in as well. She's also a Jewish woman of specific means, and I think
Mhm.
there's an added idea of like, oh, if you have the means to be able to have a child,
You
then
must have children.
you should be having children. Like there's no excuse for you not to. And then so I think it's interesting, like anytime we have conversations about not just feminism, but just about like how people exist in the world that we live in today, that all of these different identities factor in together. It would have been a very different movie, I think, if she wasn't a Jewish woman or if she
Uh,
wasn't
Yeah.
a upper class woman. So
Mm.
I
mhm.
I really enjoyed this. I think there were definitely, it's funny to say, I think this was the director's, was this her first feature
Mhm.
film?
Yeah.
It almost it felt that way. It felt that way
Yep.
in that the same way that I feel like in my book I kind of threw everything in, like, because you don't know necessarily how much is going to, like, where you're
Make
going
it.
to go from here. Yeah, and how much is going to make it. And I did feel like that at times when I was watching it, like some things would feel like a little repetitive to me, but at the same time, the idea of like people, not people, women being told to have children and when it's acceptable and how to exist in the world, that's also repetitive too. So I also don't necessarily fault the director for making the choice to have these things constantly reinforced.
Well, so I sent this morning. It's the concept of this entire film of a. I'm just gonna put the spoiler warning
Yeah.
right now. If you guys haven't seen Clock, it's now streaming on Hulu. We're gonna jump into spoil it. So follow this podcast, come back, listen to it. Hit the links in the show notes below for all of uh Kelly's book and Boobies and Newbies and where you guys can stalk Nugs on Twitch. Uh and that said, this is it. This is spoiler territory. This movie is based this concept of a woman who is essentially trying to quote unquote fix her biological clock so that she can have this desire to have kids. We'll talk about that in a second, but this entire concept is based off of this short film that she actually did for Hulu in 2020. And the short film's 3 minutes. I don't know if either one of you guys got to
I
watch it.
did.
I did too.
The short film is like proof to me that you can take a concept that is poorly executed and execute it on a grand scale.
Mm-hmm.
Because in
Mm.
terms of quality, like I don't know how you guys felt about the short film version of this. Was not impressed by that, and had I watched that first, I probably wouldn't have watched Clock.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of get to see this is like a very early blueprint, and she kind of has gone back over time and really kind of articulated this and understood like the things that she wants to address within this movie. And I think, yes, it's a little bit on the nose sometimes, but I think these are also topics that we as a culture aren't, we know that they're issues that people face, but we're just not ready to have these conversations yet because it comes up against what we know is the norm.
Yeah, I think it was it really interesting timeline too of like when the short would have been made and when this one came out, especially following the overturning of Roe-v-Wade. I do think this was a good time to release this movie, and we talk about that in movies and shows and books all the time, that sometimes it's pure luck when the timing works out. Like I remember when the first season of Handmaid's Tale came out and it happened to be in a very interesting political
polarizing
shift in our country. And I think a lot of people liked it, but also feared it for that very reason. And I felt the same way about this movie. And I'm with you. I agree with you. I don't necessarily think I would have watched the feature film if I had just seen the short. Not to say that the short was bad. It was short. Like I feel like there wasn't necessarily enough there for me to like cling to, but there was an idea. And I think that idea did translate into the feature.
Yeah, you could definitely see there was one scene from the short that showed up in the movie of when she's holding the invisible baby. Because the director was actually the woman in the movie Clock holding the invisible baby when she comes in towards the end. And so she's basically recreating what she created in the short, which I thought was so cool.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
I didn't catch that. So good call. Good call for there.
Nice.
So the short has Jennifer Wex. I don't know if Wexler, the chick from Teeth.
Yeah, I love her.
If you know, you know. But she basically is like this established businesswoman, and like kind of is disturbed by like the hearing of a clock. And that's kind of like all the short really is. I don't think it really dives down as deep as this one. It just kind of seems like this like proof of concept, whereas when she comes into write this one, like you said, Kelly, I think it just kind of was like he's trying to articulate so many things. And I don't know if that's like necessarily a problem for you guys. I think that's, for me, that's one of the things that I really loved about this film, is that this film is multifaceted, it's multi-layered, it's a conversational piece that needs to be had not just necessarily among women, but also among men who also have this societal thing, because we talked earlier, one of you guys brought up earlier about how like it's expected within motherhood for women, and like I'll be honest, our first probably 2 years of marriage, well, I've been married for 9 years now, and our first 2 years of marriage, we had certain people that would be in our lives that when are you guys having kids? Because that is the societal expectation. You get married, you have kids, you grow old. Yeah. And that's not necessarily something that is within my plans. So like my wife and I stepped back, we talked about it, we prayed about it, we waited until like we felt like we were on the same page, and we just said we just don't feel like kids are right for us. And that concept quite literally like blows people's ever-loving minds out.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Well, and I feel like the way you did it, kudos to both of you, because I feel like that's something that not a lot of people do. And it's like we are, I don't know the right word, because imprisoning is not the correct word, but I feel like we are like imprisoning ourselves with what we think the expectation is, because you guys talked and you guys were like, that's just not for me. And then that's amazing. I feel like more couples need to have a true, honest talk about where, not just like where you see yourself in 10 years, because everyone has like a blanket answer that they give their job, their friends, all of that. Like really get into it and be like, do you want kids? Do you want to have all of your time taken by that, and you are now a unit, a person, a caregiver that is now in charge of a life? And it is not, people have pets and stuff, but you can leave to a degree. You can leave pets alone for a few hours, and yes, they may bite and chew on stuff, but you can't do that with a kid. So there's a lot of like stuff you have to talk about, and the fact that it hopefully is changing a little bit more, obviously because of the times we live in, totally understandable. But like I really commend you both on having that hard talk, because it's not easy, because you do get the backlash from your parents, your grandparents, their like everyone in your bubble is going to have an opinion regardless if you have children or not. So I thought it was good that they brought it up, and that they somewhat showed her husband's feelings on it as well, which I thought, it's good to have, because generally in movies, I guess, they don't, if it's like a woman's issue like movie, they obviously are like bringing light to that issue. But it was nice to have a little glimmer of like this character's male feelings slightly on it.
One of the things too that I liked about how Ella's story is bookended is when you watch her at the baby shower in the beginning of the film, you can definitely tell that she's an outsider. And that's how I feel sometimes with kids. Like I said, this movie hit me on a really personal level. To where like at one of Elle's, the friend Shauna is actually pregnant, and she like turns and she's like, hey, do you want to feel the baby kick? And it's kind of like no, but you kind of feel like there's this she feels like an outsider, but she's also like treated like an outsider. And at the very end, the climax, when she's basically calling out Dr. Simmons, she says a line that says that I'm desperate to be normal. The way that she says that is that it's this expectation, this understanding that if you're a woman and you don't have kids, then clearly you're not normal. Like that's everyone's definition of normal. And so to kind of have that, you're juxtaposed and you kind of get to see her in this really intimate way was a beautiful thing, because that you could definitely argue that like she really hasn't made any progress as a character. She's exactly where she wants to be, but she's also fed up with the expectations that everyone and their mothers has around her.
Yeah. Well, and it's in a nutshell, this movie for me begs the question of what is the bigger horror in society today? Is it parenthood? Is it being a parent? Or is it the lack of wanting to be a parent? And I think that's honestly a great reflection of the way society treats women specifically, because while I understand that there are men and couples as well who, you know, like you said, talk about how this isn't for them. Unfortunately, it usually reflects primarily only on the women, because we've been, you know, as you said, Nugs, fed this idea that it is our biological destiny that because we can, we must, because we have the parts and are able to carry life, then we must do it. It's, you know, and I mean, unfortunately, especially with what's going on today, it's specifically in the United States. I can't speak for other places, but we're seeing this awful rise of you know, not just legislation being passed, but conversations being held by the masses that are usually about what women should do and what women look like and what women are supposed to do. And we're being relegated to this role of caretaker, and that somehow that's meant to be part of our biology and not just a sociological expectation that we created. So it's just, it's a wonder. It's wild that like a movie like this can be so relevant in 2023. And it pisses me off, honestly, that it is.
Yep.
Like, it pisses me off that I connect to it so well as a childless woman in my 30s who, you know, has no desire, much like the main character, to necessarily have children. And not that I don't like kids or you know, have friends who have kids, but it's, you know, not something that I've ever felt compelled to do myself. And there shouldn't be anything wrong with that. It should, I mean, there's a reason we call it a person's right to choose, is that that should be the choice. And if that's the choice,
then that's the choice.
That's it.
No, absolutely. And like, to your comment of like, just because you have the parts doesn't mean you have to do it. I've always, even as like a young girl, like young child, it was always like, oh, is that your boyfriend? Are you going to have babies when you grow up? Are you going to be a mommy? And it's like, just because I can dunk does not mean every time I play basketball, I dunk every time. Like, I don't, just because I have the parts doesn't mean I need to do it. And I felt, so this is a little tangent, I guess, on myself, is like with this movie, I felt semi connected to our main character, because when I was younger, like, you know, 18, 20, I didn't know if I wanted to have kids. But then I had a lot of like health issues, and they basically told me that I couldn't have kids. So when I was told that I couldn't have kids, I was like, well, okay, well, there's obviously something wrong with me because I can't have them. Spoiler alert, I could, and I did. But it took like 2.5 years after them telling me that I couldn't, of really searching and being like, what can I do? Do I even want to do anything about it? IVF is extremely expensive, and you know, you're gambling basically. And thankfully, at the time, my boyfriend had already had kids with his ex-wife. So I was like, well, I'm really lucky and I'm really thankful that even though I don't get to have them myself, I get to have that pseudo experience by proxy, because my now husband has other children. So I thought it was I felt that they tackled the do I not want kids really well, so that a lot of different women in that spectrum of like they couldn't have kids or they could identify and be like, okay, now I'm connected and let's see where this goes type of deal.
And it's not only do I want or not want kids, it's why do I want or not want kids? Because I think that's something that, you know, is also explored in the movie between you know, Ella and her husband is, you know, her saying, well, let's just have sex without a condom. You know, and him telling her, well, I don't want us to have kids because your dad thinks we should have kids. Like I want you to want us to have kids. Like, and if we don't, that's fine. I'm happy with our relationship, which is honestly why the ending makes for an even more tragic betrayal because she has failed over and over and over again by her husband, by her doctors. And I say doctors because I count that OBGYN in the very first scene who basically tells her there's something wrong with her. And these are all experiences that I would venture almost every woman over the age of 21 has had is having a doctor tell you you're to this or to that, or you know, having a partner tell you one thing and then going behind your back or saying something different. And it's again, it's sad and it makes you angry to realize that so much of this is rooted in reality, and that's what makes it all the more horrifying.
Oh, absolutely. The first scene of her in her actual gynecologist office, I was like, this is terrifying, but this is what happens every time I go. This is absolutely not normal. Like the average non-female viewer would be like, oh my gosh, what are we watching? And it's like, I did that last Tuesday.
Right. Like, it's an average trip to the OB for sure.
Yeah, one of the things too, like Dr. Simmons, who's kind of like the personification of all of this stuff. So like the entire thing is like Ella gets into this clinical study that's run by Dr. Simmons, who's played by Melora Hardin, and she basically like you go through, it's like a 10-day program. You go through and they kind of like have like these like intense therapy sessions with you, so on and so forth. And she talks about how like this program will 100% fix any woman that does not want to have. And one of the things that she said that like really gets under my skin is that her line is therapy fixes the fear and and the hormones fix your desire for not wanting to have kids. And she's kind of she feels like this personification of Kelly brought up this whole like kind of state we're at right now with like the Roe v. Wade being overturned last year and kind of like individual states being able to now dictate the rights of a woman's body. And I just it's not that easy. Like it's either you want kids or you don't want kids. It's as simple as that. I feel like there's no gray areas. I don't feel like the childless couples that get into like their 50s and 60s are not like, you know what? I really wish I would have had like Saturday mornings with kids pitter pattering throughout the house. Like, no, I have had lots of people ask me if we ever regret our decisions. The truth is no. Like I don't. I feel like I'm doing good work with mental health advocacy because I don't have to worry about, you know, kids. And you know, that's again, it's stuff that we had these really long conversations about. But you know, it's not just this like topocophobia. Is that what the word is called?
Oh, the fear of pregnancy.
Pregnancy,
yeah. So,
sorry. I was gonna say that No, I lost it. Sorry. I interrupted you for absolutely nothing. Totally gone. It was like really good. And then woo.
The one thing I was going to add was I read the review of this movie from the New York Times, and
God.
I absolutely loved this one sentence where they were talking about the clinic that she goes to, the one that Melora Hardin runs, and they described it as an environmental program that feels as if Goop had been dreamed up by David Cronenberg. And I just thought the blend of like the Gwyneth Paltrow Goop aesthetic mixed with David Cronenberg, I that's the perfect way to explain it. But honestly, it kind of also ties into this idea that regardless of if we're talking about like laws that are being passed or just the way that people talk about what's going on, we try to make it sound very palatable. We try to make it sound like we're here to help you, to fix you, because we want to help you and make you better. And I can see where people like the main character would fall for this, it's almost a cult-like behavior to entice these women who you have convinced there's something wrong with them, and that if not only you can make them better, but that when you do make them better, their lives will flourish because of it, because they will be able to then fit into the mold that society has created for them. And isn't that the ultimate prize?
Yeah, one of the things too that like kind of really stuck underneath me, I think it's fantastic that New York Times kind of made that comparison of David Cronenberg and Goop, is that in the climax when she actually takes out the clock piece that is supposed to like drive it, like the entire world opens up, and you go back and you actually think about how muted all of these colors are throughout the course of this, that like if you don't want children, then clearly you are seeing the world through the lens of depression. Like Melora Hardin in this movie like goes as far in their first interaction as actually like say that a woman's desire or lack of desire to have kids is akin to depression, where there's a chemical imbalance within the brain. And that is, I would imagine that's got to be so far from the truth. I'm not a woman, so you ladies can me.
Definitely not that.
Not my experience.
No.
At least I can't.
Not my experience either.
Else.
As someone who has a child, definitely not my jam.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. The other thing I thought the colors were a really fun thing to play with in the movie. The other thing the two main things that I noticed a lot throughout was like the recurring themes of obviously like the clock and clock parts. Not only is she hearing it, but there's this grandfather clock that exists in her dad's house that's, been passed down from generation to generation. And in the end, there's a horrifying reveal that deals with ripping the clock apart. But then the other thing was eggs. And like, the very first shot of the movie is her holding a plate of deviled eggs that have eggs on top of them. And then we have like them eating caviar. And there's so many recurring themes throughout the movie that I'm just like, oh wow, we're hitting home on this one. But I mean, those two seem to be like the overall themes of the movie, though, is like the constant like haunting of time, and when is your time gonna run out, when is your biological clock going to run out, and then also eggs, meaning fertility and like pregnancy and having something to give life to.
I like too that the scene between like the one of the first therapy sessions she does with Dr. Simmons, she talks about that clock and she calls it a coffin. And then it's kind of this like, oh, I didn't necessarily mean that, but like it's this imagery of a legacy running out. Like, if she doesn't have kids, then that bloodline dies with her. And because my wife and I've decided not to have kids, like that's also something that like I've had to grapple with. And so this kind of like this awesome deconstruction of not only the fertility in this one, but also at the same time, like her having to come to terms with the fact that I'm not gonna be I'm not gonna have continue on my family line.
Which is interesting because at least for me, that's never been something that has ever crossed my mind. Like, and I think this is where when we talk about like the standards and expectations that society creates, I do think there are absolutely things put in place, expectations put in place for men when it comes to parenting. I don't think it's only on women. However, I think they're different ideas. I think a lot of the times when it comes to parenthood and, just the expectation that you need to bring life into this world and isn't this magical that you can do it? I think a lot of the time it's tied to like the role of the caregiver and the caretaker and just like the maternal side of it. But I think a lot of the time when we talk about men's role in parenting, it's a lot of, I mean, it's very misogynistic, but it's a lot of like attaching your name, attaching, I hate to say it like this, but like your seed, siring your, it's a lot of really gross language that almost feels more like cattle or like just some kind of stock that it removes all the feeling from it. It removes like all the emotion and connection to it. And I think that's why when I see a lot of conversations being had, and trust me, I am elbows deep in child-free TikTok, that a lot of it, when the conversations are being held by men, a lot of the conversations are more about who's going to take on the family name. How am I going to continue my line? And that's not the same conversation that, at least in my circle of friends, and most of my friends are women who do not have children, except for a select few. Those aren't the conversations being had. It's more about like wanting to have children because they want to have children. They want to be a parent. And I do think it's really interesting. And I'd actually be really curious to see what a version of this film would look like for men. Like,
I was thinking the exact same thing. I can't believe you just said that.
And I don't know. I don't know what that would look like, but I would be really curious to see. And I wouldn't say the equivalent because I don't think it's the same thing, but I do recognize that there are expectations when it does come to parenthood put upon men. And I would be really curious to see a movie about that because I don't think I have seen a current millennial version of that.
Yeah. Well, it's just like when my husband and I got together, he has 3 girls. So already people were like, when are you getting a son? Like, are you going to bring a son into the world?
Keep trying till you get a boy.
Yeah, basically. And when we unexpectedly found out, I was like, I want you to know, like, there's no, like, I don't know what your feelings are on this. And we had long talks. He's like, oh yeah, I get it all the time from male members of the family of like, oh, well, you got 3 girls, sucks to be you, because now you don't bring your family name down because the guy gets married and gives the name. And
because when you're a woman, you never have your own last name. Like, I want everyone to sit. Somebody told me that last year and I had never thought about that before and was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you don't ever have your own last name? We never, unless you create a last name for yourself, you will have your parents' last name, which most likely comes from your father. And you marry in to a family, you are then assigned usually your husband's last name. And even if you don't take it on, we're talking about generation upon generation of names being given to you. That when somebody said that to me, I was shook. But sit in that for a minute and then think about how uncomfortable that makes you.
Yeah.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, I would love to see this I'd be interested to see this from a male's perspective. I think, because I don't know. I've never had the majority of the conversations that I've had about these expectations have all been from conservative Christians. I've made it no point on here that like I'm still practicing Christian, and as is my wife. And one of the things that we heard all the time in our conservative circles before moving to Virginia was, when are you going to have a kid? And like, man, like it really messed with me like for a while, that like I felt like Ella, where I was like, I don't want kids. Like, am I broken? Like, is there something that's biologically wrong with me for not wanting to have a kid? Because like it said, like there's all of these stories and these things with like you sire a kid, like you go back and you watch films or read stories that are like revolve around like 16th 15th century, like classic, like even 18th century, and like the whole thing is like you have to sire a kid or else like there's shame brought upon you.
I mean, you were basically shunned.
Yeah.
Women were witches if they didn't have kids back then. And then,
now we're just spinsters. We graduated from witch to spinster or cat ladies. So congratulations, ladies. We're coming up in the world.
We're doing really good. I can't really say we because I have a kid, but like as a general woman, we're doing fantastic.
And honestly, that I fear is probably the reason why we haven't seen the version from the male perspective, is because if you just look at what single women who choose not to have children, even just down to the terminology, how they're referred to versus how men without children are referred to. He's a bachelor. He's a playboy.
Ooh.
He's a spinster. She's a cat lady. We don't have a positive term that reinforces women who choose not to have children. There isn't a term for it, at least that I'm aware of in the English language. And so I think we have to change society before we're able to have create movies and books and shows that have that perspective necessarily, because it's not out there. Like it just goes against like what society kind of dictates is going on.
Well,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, it also feels like we're stepping back now. It seems like
yeah,
in some certain circles, like it almost feels like this underground movement where we're taking steps forward But now that you have something like Roe v. Wade overturned, it now feels like we're taking all of these steps back to where
Yeah.
legislation's not just in the House or in the Senate, but also within state legislations are starting to just make absolutely crazy, ridiculous the path laws and stuff like that. And I am not political by any stretch of the imagination, but honestly, there are more pressing issues that we need to focus on, but we're just kind of sidelining because we want to take it back to the
The
grandparents'
culture
age.
Yeah.
wars.
Well,
Yeah,
and as someone who has a child, it is incredibly hard for me to have a hysterectomy if I wanted to, because when I was pregnant, I was like, all right, after birth, get everything out. I'm done. I don't want any more. One for me is I didn't think I could, so like count my blessings. And they were like, we can't do that. You have to go to X amount of hours of therapy. You need to have your husband sign off on it. Still, to this day, I have
Yeah.
to get my husband's okay to have this happen. And they were like, here are these other steps. We'd really prefer if you have another child before you go through with this. And I was like, no, I've already, like, you already said I couldn't, and now I did. So now I don't want to, like, it wasn't a traumatic birth, but it was a complicated birth because of my, like, so TMI time, I guess. I only have one ovary because I get cysts a lot, and that one got overtaken. So they were like, hey, you only have one ovary. And then they were like, oh, and that one ovary is really sad because you've had like 10 surgeries to get rid of cysts on that one. So good luck. And it's just like, well, what am I supposed to do? You tell me on one hand that I can't, and then I better just shell money into getting pregnant. And then when I do get pregnant, you're like, nope, keep going. Please be a baby machine. And it's like, I don't.
Yeah, it's moving the goalpost. I am a very political person. Like I feel like it's hard not to be today. But it's just it's frustrating. And actually, this is one of the things in the movie that frustrates me the most is, in the end, when she asks to remove the device, the doctor, one, refuses, and two, tells her, if you remove it, it's not meant to be removed, first of all. But if you remove it, you will no longer be able to have children. Like, I am taking that away from you. I'm taking the choice out of your hands. And if that doesn't tie into today in America, I don't know what does, because it really is interesting that this same doctor, as a representative of this same society, is telling her, I can fix you and make you want to have children. And when you want to have children, everything will be hunky-dory. You will have the perfect life. And then once you've been given the tools to be able to do that, and you still say, thank you, but no thank you, this isn't working for me.
sure.
You are then told, no, this is the choice you made. You were given this device. That's it. You have to deal with it. You don't get to have it taken out. And if you do, you're going to be punished. You're going to be punished for the fact that you chose not to have children. And that scene is probably my favorite scene, but also what I think of as like the most heartbreaking scene of the movie.
Absolutely.
Especially in this room surrounded by other women who are sad,
the same thing.
who are
Same
hurt.
thing, yeah.
Yes. And in different stages too. You can see that there's, like you said, there's the one woman suffering the delusions and like cradling the baby that's not there. And then there are other women who look like they've probably just kind of began the process and don't know any better. And it's really scary, because I think that's what the world we live in, that's the country we live in today, is a lot of people who have misinformation, and a lot of people who know exactly what they want, but they're being punished for that. And there's no way to win. There's no There's
No.
no way to win unless you just go with what they're telling you to do. And then even then, we see that just in the beginning scene, everyone who is a parent is complaining about everything that's going on in their lives. And so it really does feel like, especially as a woman, whether you're a mother or not, there's no way to exist correctly in this world.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
and
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I think like the tank, the sequence where she's like submerged in the tank and she kind of has to go through that video is like really
I
like
did look away.
Really?
it's really intense.
It is really
It
intense.
is really intense. And I think also like for that specifically, like that really kind of doubles down into that like whole necessarily would say like Dr. Simmons like manipulates Ella by the end, 100%.
Yeah.
And this kind of that almost kind of feels like the equivalent of like hypnotizing someone to see your vantage point.
Yes, brainwashing.
Absolutely.
Brainwashing, yeah.
I would have been her. Like the whole time I was like, this would have been me if I would have talked to this doctor in like when I was like 22. If I had a doctor like that, I mean, not quite like that, but I've definitely had doctors like that. But like, if I had a doctor like that, I would have been in this same scenario because I was like, I don't know if I want kids. And like, my life was really bad at that point. So I was like, why would I even like so it was that scene in particular. Was,
I do.
Yeah, especially
I also,
the whole like the fetus hanging down between her
oh
legs.
my,
Like
that's
the,
when
the
I looked
pendulum.
away. That's when I looked away.
That one, I was like, the imagery was incredibly shocking. And I was like, you definitely like hit the nail on the head, grandfather clock. The clock is not mistaken. And I mean, that's kind of how in my experience it has felt. It's just there. You know it's there. Like even though it's imaginary, like you feel it, you feel the weight of being like, all right, so even though I am extremely successful, not me but like colloquial me, like you are extremely successful and like your life is together and it's like they're obviously why do I need to change that? And just
I didn't expect there to be as much body horror as there was in the movie, but then in retrospect, I'm kind of like, I don't know why I didn't, because like pregnancy is you know, as much as people describe pregnancy as beautiful and amazing, and I'm sure it is for a lot of people, it is also a very horrific and traumatic experience for many. And that's what, especially following the Roe overturning, has driven me crazy is like so many people talking about, oh, well, it's only a small percentage of people who have this, you know, issues with, I think one of the things I'm most thankful about, especially with apps like TikTok, is that it's kind of provided a forum for a lot of people to talk about things that weren't necessarily being talked about at all. And I have learned so much about pregnancy from people on that app, talking about like all the things that I bet you didn't know this happened, or I bet you didn't know that this percentage of people suffered this kind of complication. And I think the reason is that if this was mainstream knowledge that we talked about all the time, there'd be a lot less people that wanted to get pregnant. There'd be a lot less people who wanted to give birth.
That's the thing. I wish we were more honest with what it actually entails to be a parent. And now I'm not saying I would change anything of becoming a parent, but if I would have known going into it literally everything that it takes to be a parent, I don't know, even though they told me I couldn't and then I ended up having a child. But like I don't think I would have. I think I would have gotten everything taken care of so that I couldn't. Obviously I'm gonna be one of those parents that's like, I love my child and I would never change a thing, but like it is fucking hard. Sorry for swearing. Like it is so hard. And especially in this day and age where there is traumatic events happening literally hourly in our world, like it is hard to keep them safe, and it is hard to keep them wholesome and pure. That feels like a bad word to me for some reason because of purity in children, and that is a whole other conversation. But like I feel like there isn't enough talk of what it actually is like being a parent. Like, yes, you see in media where it's like, oh, I hate like all the stuff that I have to do. And like, yes, that is a part of it. And yes, it is beautiful sometimes. But I think to make a more functioning society, we need to be really honest about what this stuff entails, and truly honest, not it's so beautiful in the moment. And like sometimes it is, absolutely. Yeah. But like mine wasn't that beautiful. I had copious complications, and like it was traumatic, and I would never go through it again, and that's why I tried to not. But you know, again, I got stopped at every blockade that I kept coming up against, and it's like there's, like you said, there's no winning.
Well, and like all three of us have talked about that, you know, you either want to be a parent or you don't. And the reasons why you want to be a parent will vary. However, there needs to be, if you're going to make like an informed decision about that, there needs to be the information. There needs to be the conversations being had. And I really do think that's why so much of what's happening now is because people are wising up and being able to have conversations that, let's face it, social media has affected greatly. I mean, there's a lot more ways to find information and talk to people today than there was 5 years ago, 10 years ago,
Absolutely.
30 years ago. And because of that, while that is great for, I'm going to say the consumer, meaning us, I don't think it bodes well, at least in their perspective of, let's say, the higher ups who have an idea of what society is supposed to look like. And because it has looked like this for so many years, it should continue to look like this for so many years, as opposed to thinking maybe if we make some changes, society
even better
can change for the better. But I think people are afraid of change in general, and anything that threatens the status quo. Case in point, you know, Ella in this movie.
Well, and the dad ripping up the pictures because of the status quo of her being like, I just here, it's all gone now because you don't know if you want to have kids. I mean, I can't remember exactly what he was. That part kind of blurred out for me.
Well, so like to your things, so this scene you're specifically referring to is she is disturbed because she comes to find out that this like shadowy, like elongated figure that's been haunting her was her grandmother after the Holocaust, and she like is, you can definitely tell that there's like tension in her relationship, because like one of the earlier scenes with her and her father, it's like, oh, there are a couple empty seats here that we would have, and then like he tries to like get the conversation away from her, and like her and her guilt of not wanting kids, and ultimately says like, you know, me and your mother, like we would have had more kids if we could have. We love to have sex, and like, you know, these really uncomfortable conversations.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, but like he basically talks about how like legacy is the inheritance that you give. Everyone, that's an inheritance that everyone gets. That's the inheritance that nobody talks about. And that's one of the things that, like, you know, we're passing down things to the next generations, or like we've inherited things from the next generations, whether that's habits or like something wrong with our body, or the way that we say certain words, the dialect, you know, there's so many things that you can say here. But what I want to say real quick is Kelly brought up, like, you know, pregnancy complications and stuff like that. Everything that they don't tell you. One of the things that follows that they don't tell you about or that we don't talk enough about is also postpartum depression.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When we did an entire episode last year on postpartum depression, I will provide the links in the show notes below. I did a great episode with a mother who experienced it twice with both of her kids, and she was really vulnerable. She answered a lot of great questions. We'll probably have a part 2 out to that soon, but I just want to throw that out there. Is that's a conversation I don't feel like we don't talk about it enough, and I think it's a mixture of our fear of mental health, but also at the same time this fear of women kind of this being this like earth being that's like beautiful, luxurious thing. And one of the things that Andy Samberg, of all people, recently did like an interview, and he was talking about how like leading up all the pregnancy leading up, all of his friends were like, "Oh, you guys are it's a magical time. It's like Disney World. Every day is great and it's magical and it's beautiful." And then you have the kids, and he's like, he used 3 word, "Welcome to hell."
Yep.
And his friends were like, why would you say that? And they're like, we wanted you to experience this with us, experience this pain with us. And that's definitely what it feels like you experience early on with Ella and her friends, also why she feels like an outsider with them.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, and I think this affects everyone, but I do talk about this with a lot of women, especially in the book world, is competition. And
Yes.
I do think, I think when women compete with each other a lot, and I don't think we want to. I think it's definitely, again, it's something kind of like thrust upon you. But sort of when we started the conversation, and you were talking about all the different things you have to check off, Josh, this idea of like, oh, there's, you get together, you get married, you have kids, you buy the house, you live together, whatever. That's definitely the like ladder. It's kind of the equivalent of like the corporate ladder, but like for family life, that I think, because we associate women more with the emotional side of things and love and basically any kind of feelings, that there's this expectation of like, you're going to want to get these things. And if your friends have them, you need to step up and get them too. And it makes me sad. It's a bummer, because like you want to see your best friends supporting you, like with whatever you're doing, regardless of how old you are, how successful you are, whatever's going on. Like, you want them to be there for you, and it shouldn't be conditional. And we see that. I mean, we even see that later on when her friend is getting closer to giving birth, and she has had the procedure, and she wants to touch her friend's belly and feel the baby. And you see everyone around the room just like get so excited, like, oh my gosh, she finally is interested in this. But before then, it was an issue. So it just, like I said, infuriating. This movie was like both horrific and too real and infuriating, and it made me sad. But I would 100% watch more of whatever this director is creating, because I do like, this is the kind of horror that I want people to watch, and I think people need to watch.
Well, and it kind of reminded me, not in like necessarily theme, because it doesn't have to do with pregnancy, but the movie Prisoners with
Hugh Jackman,
Jake
Gyllenhaal.
Yes.
It's real, and it happens. Like, these are events that happen, and I think that movie and this are both in the same vein of like, we are putting out a very uncomfortable topic in a more palatable way to try and shift the conversation into a healthier, more open and honest manner. And I hope that Jacknow does more pieces like this that are more real in the horror, because like you were saying earlier, for me as well, the horror movies that really get me are the ones that are real, that could
Yeah.
happen, that I could see myself being a part of this. And like, that is what's terrifying to me. In horror, like the jump scares, that's like a physiological reaction. Anyone is going to get scared by a loud noise or like a flash of a face. And like, this really gets to your, like what I call your lizard brain, like your base
Yeah.
caveman, essentially.
Lizard brain. I love it. I love that. Well, you know what's funny is like, especially because we talked about the short film that like inspired this and how it has the actress from Teeth. And I do think Teeth is actually a really comparable film to this one as well. Especially when you're talking sort of about like women's issues and you know, just sort of like how society treats and values women. I think the two of them together are really similar films.
Absolutely.
I actually like I recently just bought Teeth on DVD.
Oh man.
And
So good.
the first time that I watched this movie, I had watched both of them like a couple of days apart from one another.
Oof.
And yeah, it was quite the accidental double feature. They go really well together. But yeah, I agree with everything you guys are saying here. Like this is the type of horror that I've been attracted to over the last couple of years are those that challenge me to kind of like dig under my skin, and that like I one of the things that I love about movies, and there's a scene, one of the very early scenes in like I think it's like the first or second episode of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. They all go, they're having they all went to go see like Night of the Living Dead, and they're all like sitting in a coffee shop and like trying to dissect what that means. And that's why I love a platform like podcasting, is because you're essentially trying to get to the core of what the artist is trying to say. And I think that there is certain things about Jacknow and with this particular picture that are a little bit like on the nose, but like also at the same time, I think that it's a welcome conversation of things that are not in the normal atmosphere, that are not in the normally rotation of things that we're conversating about. And this whole thing about like, you know, at the base of this is like one of the things that I think that makes this an important film is not necessarily the things that it's trying to say about women's bodies. It's also what it's trying to say about women's mental health, especially in this day and age.
I agree. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think that's definitely a part of it too, because you know we have a tendency to and it's I think we've talked about this before in a previous episode, but I took this class in grad school that was called Psychotic Women in Horror, and I loved it because we watched horror movies from around the world. We watched a lot of international ones, but and ones that went back to, I think the first one we watched was the movie Gaslight. And it's interesting because one of the main conversation topics we would address in every discussion was, is the woman crazy, or is this just she's bucking from some type of traditional norm and being painted as crazy? And I think attaching like crazy or psycho, like these are things that we do tend to label women a lot, and a lot of the time it's or irrational, hysterical. That's my favorite. And it usually is because we tend to, you know, shy away from something that's expected. Or what's weird is it's usually when you show some kind of emotion, even though we're supposed to be the emotional gender. So I mean, it doesn't, it's like I said, there's no winning, but I do think it's interesting when it comes to how we discuss women's mental health, or how we don't discuss women's mental health.
Well, and I did like, the more we talk about this movie, the more I actually have, because I didn't like how in like constant the like egg and clock stuff, but the more we talk about it, I'm like, it wasn't for me, it was for the layman watching. It was to make sure that it hit home that these were the things that were most important in this theme of the movie. And like we've talked about in this podcast alone, is like that's why we collectively enjoy a podcast setting, because the more we talk about it, the more we're like, oh, this is not about me, or like, oh, this is about me. And that's why I felt so visceral to this. So it's like, it's interesting that I now am like, okay, I respect that choice of like shoving it in her face.
Sure. Well, like on that, like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the biggest criticisms I've seen from other people about this movie is like how there's no subtleness, like everything is in your face, like it feels like the film is like screaming at you, but like at least here in the United States, it feels like we've placed women in these roles or these expectations where like they literally have to scream in order to get their point across.
Mhm.
And that is one of
Yeah.
the things that I think this film does so well, is that it is unapologetic, it is loud, it is brash, it is in your face, and it crawls under your skin because you have performances like Harden and Diana Agron, who plays Ella in this, and Jay Ali, who plays Aiden, her husband, in this. Like you have all of these things that are so frequent in your face, whether you're talking about the clocks or you're talking about the eggs or the societal expectations and the personification of that with Dr. Simmons. This
Yeah.
movie is trying to get a very controversial point across to its audience, and it needs to be this.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it feels lost as just kind of another casual viewing, and Clock is anything but another casual viewing.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's the perfect way.
Yep.
Perfect way to say it. Yeah, I agree. I think this is, I already said it, but I think this is a movie people need to watch. And because I really encourage people to be uncomfortable. Like I really do think people need to read books and watch movies and have conversations that make them feel uncomfortable, because that uncomfortability is coming from a place of connection a lot of the times, of recognizing something about yourself, something about something you said, about a particular way you identify, whatever it might be that you don't necessarily want to say out loud, and you don't want to talk about, and you don't want to acknowledge, but it needs to be. And I think once it is, it will be a lot easier to have conversations about these topics. It will be a lot easier to take better care of yourself and the ones around you, because you'll have a greater sense of empathy and understanding. And so I really do. And I talk about this on my podcast all the time. And I know that might seem weird coming from a place of, you know, a horror film to romance novels, but there are a lot of themes that will pop up in romance as well, where I do tell people I think it's good that you are uncomfortable reading this. Like it really does. I've recognized a lot about myself as a reader, as a writer, as a person through some of the things that I've read. And I really do hope that people will watch this movie and sit through the uncomfortability and think about why it makes them uncomfortable, and do like we're doing, talk about it, please, with a woman, talk about it with somebody who has children versus somebody who doesn't have children. I think that's what's great about this collective here, is we all represent a different experience. And sure, we have some shared experiences, but we all have our own that add a unique perspective on this subject matter.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Clock is now streaming on Hulu. Meet Me in Los Feliz is now available for purchase via Amazon. And you guys can also check out Boobies and Newbies wherever you guys get your podcast from. Kelly, where can people follow you online?
Oh, you know, I'm around. I'm at Boobies Podcast across all the socials. And if you want to find me and more of like my writing, and I don't know, I do some stuff on TikTok sometimes. I'm at author Kelly Ray, Rey.
Sometimes on TikTok. I
Sometimes.
spend like
Sometimes.
I only spend like 15 to 30 minutes on TikTok, and I see Kelly's face at least 5 or 6 times.
Oh, yeah. I spend a little more time than that. That's for sure.
Nugs, where can we find you guys?
You can find me at nuggs-the-final-girl across all social media platforms, or linktr.ee/ntfg. And what
Yeah.
about you, Josh?
I am solely on Letterboxd right now. It's at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can follow Abyss Gazing wherever you guys get your podcasts from. You guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Patreon as well, where Kelly will be putting through the bonus ringer that's for as little as $1. You can hear Kelly go through potentially torture.
Worth every penny.
And it goes towards helping us get mental health resources into Comic Cons, horror cons, film festivals, after school programs, churches, etc. That list goes on and on. But remember, until next time, the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes into you.